Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Buildings Unlocked webinar. Today, we're going to cover is elevator downtime getting you down? In just about 5 minutes at the top of the hour, 10 a.m., our great panelists will share insights to help you keep your elevators running smoothly and efficiently. Today's event is brought to you by Unitech, an American elevator company. Unitech is a company with a difference. They're committed to being the most trusted, dependable, and efficient elevator partner for you, the owners and property managers, right here in the New York metro area. Also brought to you by Sierra Consulting Group. Sierra Consulting is a full-service elevator and escalator consulting firm providing knowledge and expertise in the vertical transportation area. You can reach Unitech Elevator at unitechelevator.com and the Sierra Consulting Group at sierrany.com. We'll be beginning at the top of the hour for this exciting and very informative elevator insights from Unitech and Sierra. I see many of you are now joining us, and at the top of the hour, we'll begin this Buildings New York Unlocked Is Elevator Downtime Getting You Down webinar, looking at ways to make your elevators last longer and be more efficient. Today's event is sponsored by Unitech Elevator, an American elevator group. Unitech is an elevator company with a difference. They're committed to being the most trusted, dependable, and efficient elevator partner of you, the New York metro area, building owners, and property managers. Visit them at unitechelevator.com. Today's event is also brought to you by Sierra Consulting Group. Sierra Consulting Group is a full-service elevator and escalator consulting firm providing knowledge and expertise in the vertical transportation industry. Visit them at sierrany.com, SIERRANY.com. Our program will begin shortly. And I see the numbers continuing to grow. So we'll give everyone a minute or two to continue to, how should we say, join in. All of us New Yorkers are very busy coming in. We want to thank you all for joining us. Again, this is the Buildings New York Unlocked webinar covering Is Elevator Downtime Getting You Down? We'll be beginning in just about 1 minute. Well, we've got a very good turnout. Welcome. My name is Ed Several with Buildings New York, and we're so happy that you've joined us today for the Buildings New York Unlocked Is Elevator Downtime Getting You Down? We've got a terrific lineup of panelists who are going to really dig deep into helping you understand how to make sure that your elevators are running efficiently and last a long time. And for those of you that have joined us before, you know this is interactive. This is your chance to really talk with these experts. Ask them questions. I'll moderate. So as we go along, if you have a question, simply click the hand and you could raise the hand on the bottom and I'll find you and you can ask your question. You can either put it in the Q&A chat or we can actually have you ask it directly. That's what this panel is here to do, to make sure you leave with an understanding of how to make sure that your elevator downtime doesn't get you down and you minimize that downtime. Today's presentation is brought to you by Unitech. Unitech is an American elevator company. They're an elevator company with a difference. They're committed to being the most trusted, dependable, and efficient elevator partner of property owners and building managers in the New York metro area. It's also brought to you by Sierra Consulting Group. Sierra Consulting Group is a full-service elevator and escalator consulting firm providing knowledge and expertise in the vertical transportation industry. Visit Unitech Elevator at unitechelevator.com and Sierra Consulting Group at sierrany.com, SIERRANY.com. Thank you for their generous support to make this happen. Now let's tackle the opportunities for you to make your elevators more efficient and make them last longer. With that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Today, you'll hear from Eric Lazier, Vice President, Business Development for American Elevator Group. Keith Allen, Vice President of Sales of Unitech Elevator. And Joe Caracappa, President, Sierra Consulting Group. They're here to enable you to be able to learn more, so ask them questions. And before we begin, remember, if you haven't already, register to attend Buildings New York, the largest gathering of New York metro area building owners, property managers, and facility staffs, September 14 and 15, 2022. Go to buildingsny.com. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Eric Lazier, who will take you through this very informative panel. Eric?
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Buildings New York, and thank you, attendees of this webinar. We're really pleased to be able to present what we know and love best, the elevator vertical transportation industry. By way of a really quick background, I've been doing this for 4 decades. The first decade working for one of the big multinational elevator companies in sales, engineering, and management. The next 2 decades running one of the largest nationwide independent elevator companies. And then from 2010 to 20, I worked as a commercial leader, as a supplier to the elevator industry, providing products and engineering expertise. And then just January of this year, I joined the American Elevator Group. We're the fastest growing network of independent elevator companies. Unitech has then introduced being one of our largest companies, and right here in the greater New York area. Our company now has over 1,100 employees, as you can see. Revenue is growing daily. We acquired another company just last Monday, or this past closed just this week. And so we're now up to 18 service companies spread throughout right now the eastern region of the United States, with plans to grow west. We are a major provider of elevator maintenance with over 27,000 elevators and escalators on under maintenance, and we plan to keep growing that portfolio nationwide. And I would like to go to the next slide and turn it over to my colleague Keith at Unitech.
Yeah, to echo what Eric said, thank you everyone for joining today. Unitech Elevator, we are a premier elevator service provider in the New York City area. We're part of the American Elevator Group, actually the first company at the American Elevator Group joined forces with. Previous to that, we were a member of the Fortune 500 company. Our general strategy is we look to build strategic partnerships with our customers who have like-minded goals. Typically, our larger portfolio customers or folks with multiple buildings, we tend to partner together so they can have one touch point for all of their elevator needs, as opposed to having to go through a Rolodex of contractors. We'll work on anything from destination dispatch jobs, residential jobs, commercial jobs, to universities. Next up is Joe Caracappa from Sierra.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Joe Caracappa. I've been in the elevator industry over 30 years myself. Worked for a number of smaller elevator companies, larger elevator companies, and I've owned Sierra since 2004. We currently have 32 employees in the company. Our largest portion of our business is related to category elevator inspections, where we oversee approximately 8,500 elevators in the metropolitan area. That's about over 10% of all the elevators in the 5 boroughs. With the add-on of the periodic inspections now, we've duplicated that number. So we're probably inspecting almost 18,000 elevators, 17,000 elevators annually. So that's a large part of our business, along with elevator consulting, where we represent owners and managers regarding their elevators, providing them with expert advice on what processes and procedures to put in place on elevators, and also giving advice on the right course of action as it pertains to elevators. And I'll be talking a lot today about some of the new code regulations. It seems like we get tasked very quickly by New York City Department of Buildings in handling new initiatives that they've put in place. As a licensed elevator agency, and I hold the director's license of Sierra, New York City is looking towards the expertise of companies like mine to help oversee elevators and make sure that they're safe. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk a little bit about the new code requirements faced currently in 2027. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. A little bit about actually both Sierra and American Elevator Group and Unitech. We're independent, so we provide independent advice, independent solutions. We're not tied to a specific solution from a specific manufacturer or a specific company. And our goal when we go to market, and our goal in educating the market today, is to be sure our customer base, building owner, manager community are educated, and they understand that they too can experience independence and make solutions that make the most sense for their building, their tenants, and the riding public. Next slide, please. So we started talking about the elevator life cycle. How long does an elevator last? And there's some rules of thumbs. You know, a typical elevator system performs well for 20 to 30 years. In the 20 to 25 year time frame, it's time to start thinking about a modernization. You're going to be approached by your company, your consultant, to start putting budgets together. You know, that's kind of a high level rule of thumb that most people think. Next slide, please, Ed. And then we look at different components, you know, elevator cab interiors, you know, different colors go in and out of styles, patterns go in and out of style. So usually elevator cabs are the first thing the building owner and manager wants to upgrade. Doesn't make the elevator run any better, but it makes it look better. And it also makes their tenants a little happier. They think they're in a more modern environment. And then you can see the list. I don't have to read it for you. Different components last a different amount of time. But let's go to the next slide, which is really going to be more the introduction to the meat of our presentation. There is no one answer that your elevator should last 30 years. And as I shared in my introduction, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've sat on, you know, many different sides of the table in the elevator industry. And I hear a lot from our customers today, building owners and managers. Hey, that elevator, you know, why doesn't it, the last building I was in, that elevator ran great for 40 years. Why am I being asked to upgrade this one after 15 years? Or even when I was a supplier to the industry, you know, maybe the cables that pull the elevator up and down, you know, even the elevator experts, elevator consultant experts would say, what's wrong with the elevator cables today? They used to last 30 years. Now I'm replacing them every 7 years. Well, the reality is there's a lot more to it than just, hey, it lasts 20 years, it lasts 30 years. You know, a better measurement is the number of trips, and a trip is measured in the elevator business as every time the elevator reverses direction. So it goes up from the lobby to the 3rd floor, then it goes to the 6th floor, then it goes to the 8th floor. Okay, it's still going up. Then, okay, the 8th floor, now there's a demand on the 4th floor. So the elevator reverses direction and goes back down to the 4th floor to the lobby. So that's actually considered one trip. It reversed direction once. So picture an elevator in a Las Vegas casino. It's going up and down nonstop, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, that elevator might do 3 million trips in 3 years, whereas an elevator in a condo, when people get up, go to work in the morning, they come back, they maybe go down, check their mail, they go out to dinner. You know, that's 3 million trips. Would it be 20 years? So the elevator equipment is going to last somewhat dependent upon the number of trips. And then also what type of elevator equipment it is. You know, the elevator industry has globalized, and we're seeing a lot of equipment coming in from overseas, coming in from Europe, coming in from Asia. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, often that's the cost competitiveness of the elevator manufacturers, but those markets have different benchmarks in mind. You know, the US elevator market has always thought, oh, an elevator should last, going back to my first slide, 25 years, 30 years. You know, in certain other markets, the elevators could be considered more disposable. And so sometimes obsolescence is designed in. And that's why you have to be very careful from the time you select the elevator, and more we're going to talk about today, how that elevator is being maintained. Next slide, please. And that's, or actually we can go back, I don't know, Keith, but I'm going to turn it over to Keith at Unitech to actually talk about the specifics of what the building owner manager, and really what we want to focus on is what the audience today needs to know about their elevator equipment, needs to know about their elevator consultant, needs to know about their elevator contracting company. Sierra and Unitech, two of the best in the market, but I know you all have experience with many other consultants and elevator companies, and it's kind of what you need to know about what they're doing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, monthly basis, what the equipment's doing, what they need to do, the kind of communication that is that we think would enhance your relationship with your elevator company and your elevator consultant, and also extend the life of the elevator equipment, keep it safe, keep it reliable. And with that, I will turn it over to Keith.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, perfect. So what does a good elevator maintenance look like? I think if you want to simplify this down to 3 easy things that you can look at, you could say surface. So the things you see. So if you walk into your elevator motor room, is the motor room clean? Is the floor painted? Is the logbook on the wall? Is the parts on the shelf organized? Does it look like, a clean room? If you look in your elevator pit, is your pit clean? Is it painted as well? Is there water coming in? So you have visual things that you can see. When the doors open and you look up, do you see dust? So there's visual things that you can see, and if you see that this is dirty, this is filled with water, there's garbage, that is a pretty easy indicator that maybe that isn't good maintenance, right? That being said, that isn't the be all end all. Once you get into the elevator has hundreds of thousands of parts, relays, ropes, as Eric mentioned earlier. Your actual maintenance control program, which would basically be a logbook of what your maintenance company is doing, which would measure things that maybe you wouldn't see. Are they getting into the machine and making sure it's lubricated? Are they checking the ropes? Are they going through the controller? Are they checking the wiring? Are they checking connections? So things that may not be visual that are important also play a large role in the maintenance. And I would say that would be the second thing. And then the third and last thing that is you're not going to see at the building would be the behind the scenes. And Joe touched on this earlier. Right now in New York City with the Department of Buildings, there are many ways that we have to maintain elevators and test elevators and check on testing elevators. So behind the scenes, is your elevator company equipped to handle the demands of New York City? As an example, category testing, the new periodic testing that has been implemented, the timeframes that come along with that. Those timelines have increased. We used to have more time. Now you have less time to correct deficiencies. So as an example, infrastructure for databases for the violations. How are they being tracked? How are you being alerted to your elevator company coming into the building to perform deficiency corrections in conjunction with maintenance? Part of the efficiency is if you have an elevator system that can tie your violations to your maintenance, when that mechanic is dispatched out to perform maintenance, they can at the same time address violating conditions from either a Cat 1 or a periodic inspection. In conjunction with that, behind the scenes, what is the supervision like? Obviously, the face of the elevator company in many instances is the mechanic that comes to the building every month. But behind that, there'll be a supervisor that will work with that mechanic to make sure that that specific equipment is maintained as necessary. If you have working supervision, actual mechanics that supervise versus office supervision, folks that maybe don't have elevator experience. And lastly, just having the technical acumen to take on the demands of today's market. When all those three things come together, I would say that you have good elevator maintenance. If you're doing the things that are visual, if you're actually performing the maintenance that you can't see, and then tying all that in together by letting the DOB or a consultant like Sierra know that that work is being completed, so your building can stay violation free and you don't have fines that you need to pay. Next slide, and we'll turn it over to Joe.
Okay, thanks, Keith. I appreciate that. Yeah, we've in my over 30 years of experience in the elevator industry, I've been through a lot of different initiatives and code changes. And I think right now, the last really heavy one, well, the first really heavy one I can remember was in 2009, where elevators required a lot of component additions, things like elevator pit stop switches and lighting and top of car components and things along those lines. That 2009 was a very heavy year for building owners and managers. And that happens to be the same year that the category testing was initiated. Prior to 2009, there was something called the Local Law 10 of 81, where elevator companies can actually self-certify themselves the condition of an elevator and file that paperwork with DOB. So 2009, there was a lot of changes, and things really ramped up at that point. And ever since then, it seems like the city really has been asking a lot of building owners and managers. Around 2016, they initiated the door lock monitoring requirement, where mostly all elevators needed an additional system to be able to oversee the actuation of the operation of the elevator cab and hoistway elevator doors. So that was a big initiative. And just so happens this morning, I did a DLM inspection, and this is 2022. And we were supposed to do these in 2018, finishing up by 2020. So that initiative took a long time, and we still seem to be getting drips and drabs of inspections for door lock monitoring coming in. But now we're faced with another initiative, and that initiative is something called single plunger brakes. And single plunger brake compliance is due by January of 2027. Not all elevators need single plunger brakes. Maybe we can move to the next screen and then next slide, and I can pinpoint a couple of things. There we go. So by 2027, we're going to be required to replace any type of mechanism that's actuated on a brake with a single point of actuation, meaning that in certain type of elevator machines, we're going to say that initially when we started this process a couple of years ago of starting to collect data, we felt that there was a little less than 10%, but now going around and looking at our clients' elevators, we think that there's probably more than 10% of New York City elevators that don't have a code compliant brake. And because of that, what Eric mentioned before, with the influx of different manufacturers, different companies created different type of braking systems for their elevators. So as we would think that a lot of elevators from the 1960s that were designed by certain manufacturers may not comply, we are seeing some other braking systems that don't meet the requirement, that are a little bit newer, and those manufacturers are coming up with different solutions, to correct that issue. I think a question just popped up. Maybe I can answer that as we go along. So as Sierra is going to our properties, collecting data on single plunger brakes, we are looking at the hardware of elevator equipment, the machinery in either the basement or the elevator overhead machine room. And that type of braking system will then lead us to either a hardware replacement, whereby the elevator braking mechanism can be replaced entirely, to a double application or a double plunger brake. And that would be an easy way of solving and complying with that modification. The second way of doing that would be to install a device called a rope gripper, or an unintended movement device protection device. And what that essentially means, that if the elevator ever drifted with the elevator brake opened and not applied, potentially if there's people inside the elevator could go down at a rate of speed that doesn't actuate the elevator emergency braking system or safety devices. And the elevator, in theory, can drift down and find itself inside the elevator pit. So the city would like in the case of a single plunger brake, an additional component installed, which again is called a rope gripper or unintended movement device. Not all the time is this really easy to install. So you could keep the single plunger brake, but you would have to install the unintended movement or rope gripper device. If that is the case, what we're finding now is the elevator logic or elevator control systems, in some cases, are not prepared or have not been designed to accept that additional component, the rope gripper. So whereas you might want to keep the machine that you have and install this additional component, the unintended movement component, the elevator controller may not be able to accept it, may not be able to control it, may not be able to activate it. So in some cases where we have elevators in their 1990s or early 2000s, we're getting the data on those controllers and requesting feedback from the controller manufacturer to see if that circuitry is available for the device to control it. And if it's not, can they make it and build it so that we can meet the requirements for 2027? So very similar to door lock monitoring when it was in 2016 and 2018, where we were starting to ramp up the process of making sure that elevator controllers could be retrofitted for door lock monitoring. We're going to be almost doing the same exact thing of the manufacturers in some cases, where if a hardware replacement can't be performed and we want to add the rope gripper, we then have to look at the logic and the control systems to see if they have the capability to accept the rope gripper. And then really the last way of resolving a single plunger brake situation is to either replace the machine directly, which is expensive and takes a lot of time and doesn't really upgrade the elevator system in the life cycle analysis that was discussed by Keith and Eric, around 20 to 25 years of useful life. At that time, if you have a machine from the 1960s, 1970s, and even the 80s, it may make sense at that point not to replace the machine to comply with the mandate, but replace the entire elevator system and do a full elevator modernization. Now, I know a lot of people have just spent $20,000, $25,000 on door lock monitoring, maybe a little bit less, but I would say that's the range, between 2018 and 2020. And then you have an elevator that had a single plunger brake and needs that replaced by 2027, when you could be looking at substantial money by retrofitting an existing elevator that really should have been replaced. Some of our clients, because the door lock monitoring fell within the time of the rent law change, they opted to not modernize their system and just do the door lock monitoring for the amount of money that I discussed, but now have to face the next step of the 2027 compliance period of the brake and may be forced to actually do the modernization now. Some people ask, well, could we use the door lock monitoring system that we just installed? You know, typically it's a add-on device onto the elevator control systems that is now completed by software. So in most cases, and probably all cases, the door lock monitoring system that was installed will not be used in the elevator modernization. So just to summarize, it's important to start gathering the data on your elevator machinery to see if it has the proper braking mechanism. Again, only around 10% of the elevators in New York, in the 5 boroughs, have improper brakes. So this doesn't apply to everyone. But if it does apply to you, depending on the age of your elevator, you'll have to make a decision to see if the elevator can accept either a new brake, an unattended movement device, based on the criteria that I already explained, a new machine, or in the case of the age of the equipment, a full elevator modernization. Next slide.
Joe, actually, Joe, before we leave this slide, I just want to make sure, I think you've covered this, but just in case, Jeannie has asked if the door lock monitor is not installed, are we unable to pass category 1 testing? If it's not installed, will it be unable to pass category 1 testing is the question from Jeannie. You may have covered that. You may want to. No,
I didn't. Right. Thank you. It popped up quick. So Jeannie, you're not supposed to pass your category testing if you don't have door lock monitoring. So as I mentioned, that was a 2016 initiative. And as I mentioned, I did one this morning. If you haven't had it installed, it's usually incumbent on the testing company to list that the door lock monitoring hasn't been put in yet. Okay.
Tying into what you just said, Joe. So, you know, the door lock monitoring the single plunger brake code requirement coming up in 2027. Additional to that, we've seen a lot of planned obsolescence almost. I don't know that it's planned. I don't work for those companies, but a lot of controller companies, we get lots of letters these days letting us know that the end of useful life and the end of technical support is coming on certain items such as drives, encoders, things like that, where it used to be able to, okay, our drive went, we can get a replacement. They're now requiring engineering on controllers that were put in somewhere between 2000 and 2010. And in OEM land and proprietary land, sometimes those materials are obsolete within 2-3 years of putting a new elevator in, where you can sometimes see that built into service contracts. So aside from the actual code requirements coming from the Department of Buildings, there is an increase in repair cost that we've seen an influx of outside of that. And that ties directly into downtime. If you have a drive that used to be a pickup item, at a local park shop that now requires engineering, we can see lead times anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks when we put in requests for things like that. The request itself will take a day or two. Then we get responses back. Okay, this needs to go to engineering. And then you're usually in a 2-week buffer for that. You can pay extra to expedite that. But again, that just sort of starts adding into the costs of the elevators. So that creates downtime aside from the shutdown, whereas it might have been something that we can get it next day and get you back in service. Some components have started to, have lengthier shutdown times. As far as, looking at why you would modernize and how do you know it's time to modernize, some other things to consider too are, obviously the code upgrades are huge. And then if you're going to be doing building renovations, so a lot of customers of ours will look to package doing elevator modernizations at the same time or in conjunction with building facelifts. So when you have a new lobby, or they may just do the inside, as Eric mentioned before, they may just do the cab. Visually, your tenants think the elevators are new. But if you were to go up into the motor room, sometimes you see machines from the 50s, controllers from the 80s. It looks like a brand new building, granite and marble on the walls, and everyone expects the elevators to run. But behind the curtain, you have, a 40-year-old elevator. So a lot of times with building renovations, it can behoove folks to think about modernizing. A lot of times you'll take one car at a time. You'll have to leave a car for service for the folks if they're doing, GC work so they can get materials. But that is something that folks think about as well. And then energy efficiency, if you're working on older equipment, if you're having newer controllers installed, we actually do get a fair amount of requests where people are asking us how much energy is the machine drawing. You're not talking wild savings, but there is a savings that can be captured. In some cases, we can try to get information from the manufacturers on how that would help your building overall. So we have a couple more questions, or cool. So on the next slide, let's see. Hey, do you have the next slide? Well, I believe this one, Joe, starts to get into the role.
Yeah, I can go into a couple of things, right? So to jump on some of the comments that you made, noticeable increase in repair costs. Sierra is asked daily to review proposals, review shutdown logs, review documents from elevator contractors to help our customers analyze when it's time to start considering elevator modernizations. So the consultant's role with this is basically working directly with ownership and management. We, as I think Eric mentioned before, Sierra is not affiliated or associated with any elevator companies. We don't do elevator maintenance. We specifically now are a heavy lifting elevator testing company due to the requirements of New York City, but we have a large business of elevator consultings where, we represent our owners and managers on their elevators and whatever type of information they need. And we try to provide information based on data. As Eric mentioned before, where there are some systems that are coming to market now that actually regulate and tell us over the internet the performance of elevators, so that there's really, some of the guesswork that we used to put into place is backed up now by data. So as Eric mentioned, we do have some elevators that travel 50 miles a day, which is incredible. And then you can calculate the usage of certain components based on that, that amount of travel. So there are some predictive ways to start putting together data to help us make these decisions. And again, we will represent the building owners and managers in doing so. Sierra tries to put together specific criteria for elevator modernization, providing expertise in the area of what components work better than others, have different support. As Keith was mentioning, some manufacturers are quick to make their components obsolete, which becomes very difficult for owners and managers of buildings. A specific one I can mention is the door restrictors that people get confused with door lock monitoring. The restrictor was a device that the city asked to put on top of the elevator cab to prevent the door from being opened if the elevator is not level with the floor. So it gets quickly and easily confused with door lock monitoring. I have customers say, "Oh, I just replaced that, didn't I? Or we just put that in. This was a different component." And in some cases, we find this component that was installed only a couple of years ago, either not effective anymore, not working, or been disassembled because it's not providing proper coverage of the elevator cab and actually getting people stuck inside the elevator. So we try to make the right representations on those components so that the customer is not seeing the continuation of proposals for equipment that needs to be replaced. So that's on a review side of the elevators, and by looking at the call logs by the elevator contractors, we can calculate what components are failing and make recommendations based on that. Not all the time is it something that requires a modernization, but it could be something that could require a replacement of certain parts. So that's the role of an elevator consultant. Next slide, please.
Actually, Joe, before you move on,
Yeah.
we actually have had a question here for Keith, and my mouse froze, so I couldn't get that slide fast enough for everyone in the audience, but it actually gave the opportunity for a question he asked. Keith, can you address how maintenance quality relates to when modernization time is upon us? And then there's a question for you, Joe. Can you address recommended frequency of maintenance visits? So Keith, we'll start with you. Can you address how maintenance quality relates to when modernization time is upon us?
Sure. This is a
Did we lose Keith?
No, I was muted. I apologize.
Okay.
I was going to say, it's a very layered question. It's a great question. I'll try to keep to a couple of concise points. So, I mean, on the surface, how a good maintenance could elongate the life of your elevator is if you're allowing the elevator to, let's say, get dirty, if you're not checking and cleaning and going through the elevator. Let's say you were to have a, let's take the door operator that I mentioned before. So let's say you let your door operator equipment continue to collect dust. The maintenance elevator mechanic doesn't come in and do anything, or he checks in with the super, he's there for a half hour and he leaves, and you notice that your door operator equipment, is dusty and dirty. If that never gets cleaned, that could tie into the last slide of, I may have to create a proposal to replace the door operator at some point. If those components aren't oiled and lubed, just like your car, if you don't get an oil change, if you don't upgrade your lubricants, you could have a catastrophic failure in your engine. You could have a failure in your elevator machine. So if you're not doing proper maintenance on a monthly basis, you may not notice an oil leak coming out of your machine. And if you don't notice that and your machine no longer has oil, then you could have a catastrophic failure of a very expensive component. And a component like that, if that were to go, is the type of component that it's expensive enough where you would be really, really thinking about modernizing the entire elevator and not just, putting $60,000, $70,000 into a new machine, rough costs. Aside from that, how a good maintenance could affect, how it could elongate, if you're doing those sorts of things, if your traffic patterns, like Eric was mentioning earlier, if you don't have like a lot of foot traffic, if you don't have a high demand building and you have a good maintenance program and you're able to install these code upgrades, like if you have room in your motor room and you can add a rope gripper, or you can upgrade to a dual plunger brake, and you have well lubricated, well maintained, well looked after equipment, you can see the life go longer than that 25 to 30 years. It really is dependent on the frequency of people in the building, what the building usage is. Like, we've got buildings that people move safes in. They're constantly adding, thousands and thousands of pounds of weight to the car. And that takes away from, the lifespan of the elevator over time. It's just getting more use and abuse. It's similar to commuting. If you commute close to home, your car may last longer than if you're driving, like me, to Astoria every day and back. So I think a car is a really good example of like a real life example of what we deal with, personally day to day, of how a good maintenance can affect the life of your elevator.
That was good, Keith. I think that I can just go right off of that based on the next question, which was a great question. Recommended visits of maintenance. So there is criteria in place required by New York City. I think Keith mentioned it earlier. In each elevator machine room, there is a booklet that does specify frequency of maintenance performed on certain components. And in that book, the elevator service provider the technician is required to go through that logbook inside the motor room and check off the each role that he or she performed during regular maintenance and sign that on a monthly basis. Now, what gets tricky is in some cases, some elevator providers, I haven't seen this with Unitech, but some elevator providers only provide maintenance on a quarterly basis. That's something for you to look at as it pertains to your elevator service contract. What are you paying for monthly in the service contract that translates to what should be performed on site? Now, that book on site does call for monthly service and monthly, quarterly, and I think biannually and annually. It's got different sections. But monthly, basically, it's a checklist of things that the mechanic should be looking at while they're on site. So recommended amounts of visits should be monthly, once a month. Time varies between an hour to 2 hours per elevator per month. There's a lot of things that come into play with that. Some buildings have locked out floors where the elevator goes directly into the apartment. That becomes very tricky. Access issues. There's some buildings that just don't want anybody in the building because of the foot traffic, where we've had to do maintenance on weekends to accommodate the building owner, building managers, and tenants. So each application, each elevator, each building has a different set of circumstances. But I think the best place to start is looking at the elevator maintenance agreement that you have in place. If you need somebody to look at it, please send it to us. We can take a look at it, make some recommendations to you on what we believe the coverage of the contract should provide. And then based on the how extensive that coverage is, will also trigger cost associated. So if you have a contract that has regular hour callback from 8 to 4:30 and you pay for overtime, contract coverage costs should be less. If you pay for elevator testing, contract costs should be less. If you start to build in more coverage based on the equipment's age and condition, the contractors will look at that, weighing their risk on what they believe they want to take on. And then the contractors put together based on those sets of circumstances. So amount of visits once a month, an hour to 2 hours per car per month is somewhat standard, but we have seen different segments of maintenance being performed by different service providers, where maybe in a building that you just built, that the service provider doesn't provide that same level of service monthly, goes out quarterly. It's something for you to, as a building owner or manager, to look at.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback right off that, and Joe, you bring up a really good point, and that is something that we often see. Anytime someone reaches out to our company and asks us for a proposal, one of the first questions that we ask is, and we will have people black out the price. You know, it's not about knowing what the price is. To give you a competitive proposal, it's good to know what that coverage is, because I could have a wide range of costs where I'll have people that ask me to come twice a year, whereas most people want someone to come monthly. And if nothing is covered in a contract, that monthly cost will be considerably less to what Joe just said. And then that's a lot of times. My other question is, do you have a consultant involved? And because the consultants, aside from everything that Joe described of what they perform, a lot of time they sort of serve as like a playing field. They level the playing field, where they'll put out a specification where everybody is bidding to the same scope of work. Like, so Joe mentioned an hour to 2 hours of maintenance. So if you have hydraulic elevators, that will typically fall into the 1 hour side, and that everybody that is going to submit a price for that will bid to that specification. So, you know, you're having an apples to apples comparison.
One other thing I'd like to add, Keith and Joe, thanks, is, you know, elevator equipment varies, as we talked about earlier. You might have a 25-year-old elevator and you've got a lot of moving parts in that machine room, and you might even still have carbon brushes and there's dust, or you have oil that, you know, leaks and needs to be cleaned up. And then you have the brand new elevator Keith talked about that might have been installed at the end of 2021, and it's all solid state, fewer moving parts. And I think, you know, some of the elevator companies that Joe mentioned said, well, we don't have to go out quarterly because there's, you know, it's not that much to do. It's like the car analogy. And, you know, when I had a 1964 Chevy, I mean, that was all kinds of stuff to do under the hood. You had your timing light, you had your spark plug gapper. Now, you know, 2022 car, you open the hood, I don't know what I'm looking at. It's just a piece of flat steel. So elevators, you know, somewhat similar as you know, technology changed and everything is solid state. But one of the things that we like to talk about in the American Elevator Group, you know, I'm not really pitching, but is, and Keith alluded to it in his talk about maintenance, is you have service you can see, and that's the elevator mechanic showing up and taking care of the building and making sure it's level, making sure the push buttons are lit, making sure there's no dust hanging from those door screens. And then you have the service you can't see, you know, that you are checking the machinery and you are checking the contacts and the wires and the cables and things like that. And some of that service you can't see, indeed, may get scheduled quarterly in the maintenance control plan, or even, you know, twice a year, as Joe went. But the service you can see is the customer, and that with your customers, you know, the building owner, manager, customers, the tenants, the visitors, the writing public. You know, we think it is important, and we agree with Joe 100% that a minimum monthly visit on an elevator makes sure that the elevator company is looking at the elevator from the perspective of the writing public. What do they see? I mean, I get frustrated. I live in a 42-story apartment building, and when those push buttons, when I press the button, the light doesn't light up, I don't know if the elevator's coming. And as an elevator person, I understand light bulbs go out, and if it's out for a week, okay. But if it's out for 2 months, 3 months, in the case of my building, then I'm frustrated. So I think that regular maintenance is important. I think we can go to the next slide, which I think was general questions of the group.
Yes. So questions, let's bring them on. You've all done such a great job of asking questions along the way. First of all, I want to just say thank you, Joe. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Keith. This was really informative. And so now here's a chance. You have 3 experts that can give you more information. So let's see, get those hands raised. Anyone for some more questions to help you make sure that elevator downtime doesn't get you down? Anyone? And while we queue up those questions, remember today's been brought to you by Unitech Elevator. They're as you can see, the passion that Keith has displayed, that's representative of their entire company. They really work for you. They want to be your best partner to make sure your elevators are always running smoothly and efficiently and last a long time. So make sure you reach out to them at unitechelevator.com. And you saw the knowledge that Joe Carappa has at Sierra Consulting Group. That pervades throughout their entire organization. So reach out to Sierra Consulting Group because they're a full service elevator group. They take care of escalators as well. Reach them at sierrany.com. And don't forget about American Elevator Group, Eric Lazier and his group, what they do. Remember, Unitech is part of the American Elevator Group. So you're getting really a very deep organization behind you. So other questions?
Hey, Joe, while we're waiting to see if there's any questions here in the last couple of minutes, can you flip to the next slide? Yeah, so if anybody is still on the call, wants to ask a question offline, you can take a picture or get our contact information from Buildings New York, from Ed. But you right here, Ed's already given you our websites, but these are our personal email addresses, and all three of us are available always, via email. You can always ask for our phone number in an email. We didn't put didn't want to overburden you with information. We're always able and ready and willing to talk to the building owner manager community, whether you do business with us or not, or you plan to or not. We don't care. This is all part of serving the community. We do a lot of individual workshops, all three of us, lunch and learns, WebExes, micro Zoom meetings. Whether you want to really dig into the code with Joe, or dig into, say if you have a national portfolio that you're tying into, someone like myself can talk about the elevator markets all across the country. Keith, of course, is our expert in the greater New York City, Northern Jersey area with Unitech. So you have all of our names, companies, emails here. Feel free to snap a shot with your phone and reach out to any and all of us. And if there's no questions, Ed, I want to just thank you for all of your time, and of course my co-presenters Joe and Keith. Thanks for all the preparedness and putting on this show, and most of all, thanks to Buildings New York and their membership.
Great. Well, Eric, thank you very, very much. And I also want to just say thank you to all of you in the audience. I'm very impressed. I think we've lost one since the start, so you've all hung in there. So this must be a very, very important topic, and you've all told us and shared with us this is important. So again, we want to thank you. We have another session coming up this coming Tuesday. So we'll have another one from the Habitat Group, and they'll be talking about compliance. So make sure you join us for that. And again, if you have not yet registered for Buildings New York, join us at buildingsnewyork.com, buildingsny.com. Register for our September 14th and 15th event. And again, I just want to just say thank you to Eric, thank you to Keith, thank you to Joe. Amazing information. Make sure you write down the information here. We'll also follow up with some emails to make sure you have that information to make sure that your elevators continue to run smoothly, efficiently, and you don't have that downtime to get you down. Everyone, thank you very, very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.